There she is. Okay, now we're good. You never know with the connection. So, all right. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. Welcome to Legit Leadership Live, episode 8. I can't believe we're already in the 8th episode. I am so excited to have with us today. And actually, Natalie, I'm hearing a little bit of background feedback. Are you hearing that as well?
I was, so I muted myself.
Okay, got it. Awesome. We could do that back and forth. It might be mine also. So recording live from not in New York City for me, but Natalie, where are you based out of today?
I'm in Brooklyn today.
Oh, Brooklyn. All right. So, well, welcome everyone. Legit Leadership Live, episode 8. We are delighted to have you. I am joined by a lovely friend of mine and someone who's just so awesome. I cannot wait to share more about Natalie McVeigh with you. But welcome, Natalie, to episode 8. Thanks for being our guest today.
Thanks, Robbie. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, for sure. So just a reminder to the whole crew who's tuning in, and I would say good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I heard that there's some folks from around the world, so we're so happy to have you. And really the purpose of Legit Leadership Live is to have some real talk conversations with leaders across different industries, with different areas of expertise in leadership. And I'm just really delighted to have you, Natalie. And I was wondering, I know I'll share a little bit of your bio in a moment, but could you take a sec to introduce yourself? Like, who are you? What do you do? And we can take it from there.
Sure. Yeah, I'm a consultant, a mediator, and a coach. So I specialize working with privately held companies, although I have worked with some publicly held companies. And why I like working with privately held companies is because it's really about relationships. So it could be a family, it could be two friends having started that company. So it's really not just the management consulting side, but the relational affective side.
Absolutely. And we're going to dive into that today, which I'm super psyched about. And a little bit of additional kind of info about Natalie. She is managing director. Congrats on your recent promotion.
Thank
Uh,
you.
Yeah, at EisnerAmper's Center for Individual and Organizational Performance and the Center for Family Business Excellence group within the private business services practice. And Natalie has over 10 years of experience as a consultant and a coach with expertise in domestic and international multinational corporations, both public and private, and family-owned businesses. And so I know for sure you work with very complex scenarios and and families, organizations in and of themselves, but then families add in a whole nother layer of complexity. Um, and Natalie, we're still getting a little bit of feedback on your. Okay, there we go. And then I'm going to ask you a question in a moment. Um, the other thing that I wanted to share with you all before we dive in is that Natalie partners with high net worth families to help them reach their personal and professional goals and assist with transition issues. She is a baller. She is trained at Harvard Law School's program on negotiation with deep expertise in complex conflict resolution and interest-based resolution, and a certificate in mediation. And so today we're going to dive in and we can get started. We have so many questions for you, and let's take this conversation wherever it goes. So thank you again for being here, to you and to everybody who's joining. So tell me, Natalie, if you can, much of your research and expertise focuses on the relationship between leadership, personalities, and neuroscience. And I know, I mean, you know, I'm obsessed with learning from you. I think, and we met in Portugal actually for EisnerAmper Cirque du Sophia Women's Leadership Conference, where you were one of the amazing facilitators. And every time you talk, I'm like, oh my gosh, taking notes on what you're saying. So you have this Rolodex of fun facts. I would love to know, for our audience here, and which consists of leaders across industries, folks who are in different capacities and different stages within their career, what are the most important facts that we need to know about the intersection between neuroscience, leadership, and personalities? What can you tell us?
Yeah. The main thing is neuroscience is everything. If we're talking about habit, if we're talking about change, neuroscience is the linchpin for all of it. The secondary piece to think about is that 90% of expectations go uncommunicated in organizations. And so we might have unmet expectations. And the last piece is you are the center of your relationships. So only you can make that change and to see what you want. So a lot of this is about you knowing who you are, what you want, and how to communicate that effectively. So you're not just, missing each other by chance.
Yeah. So when you say 90%, like that's a lot. Like what happens when we are kind of missing or the communication wires are crossed? Because that's like pretty much almost everything, really. So what's the impact of that big data point you just shared with us?
The impact is that we're making meaning out of things. I actually just got off a coaching call for two partners in a company that they started together. And one of the pieces I understood by the end of that, and I think came to light between these two gentlemen, was that they actually had a different idea of how they were going to be leaders in that company. It was an idea that was in each one of their heads, but they hadn't yet articulated. So they were making meaning of, one of them was making meaning that he didn't trust the other. And the other one was making meaning of the other one that he was reckless. And neither of those were true. They do have very different styles of how they lead, very different processes and very different structures, but they hadn't actually come into the organization they built saying, this is the half that I want, John, this is the half that I want, Steve, and this is what I expect of you, and this is what I expect of you. So they were having these conversations that were just missing each other. And the meaning they made, two men who started this company 10 years ago, who were best friends, they made this meaning up at the end of these last few years that have gotten tough and tense because they've grown. So it's very positive why it's gotten tough and tense. They're juggling too much. Is now we're not friends who trust each other implicitly. We're people who are holding in information because we don't trust each other. And that's really what those unmet expectations do, is our brains are constantly trying to make sense of data that's coming at it. And we're 4 to 7 times more negative than positive. So that story I make about you, Raabia, when you're not meeting my needs that I haven't told you about, but I think you know because I know them about myself, bias of similarity is that you don't like me, or you're being mean, or you don't trust me. And you're making up the same story every time I miss the expectations you have for me that I don't know about.
Wow. Wow. That's like, you can see just the tailspin that could happen as a result of that. And it can become perpetual over, I'm thinking, gosh, over hours, months, days, years, like it just kind of aggregates. That's intense. So what, in what, tell us a little bit about that negative versus positive, like in terms of how many more times we have, and I don't know if, is that the same thing as negativity bias or is that something else? Like, can you share with us, like, what's going on to make us lean in that direction?
It's both the negativity bias. It's also, cognitive psychologists will say they're either 4 to 20 emotions, but we'll stick with neuroscience here. And for neuroscience speaking, there are 7 emotions. There's anger, anxiety, fear, sadness, shame, joy, and love. One hand has 5 more depleting or painful emotions. All are essential. You need all of them. These 5 emotions help make sure we're safe. The other 2 really are reserves for our ability to be in relationship and our energy. They're important too, but these 5 emotions are trying to keep us safe on a daily basis, really thinking through all the mechanisms to do that. So our brain is processing at a rate 4 to 7 times more likely of negative than positive. And some really important relationship research. And relationship is anytime there are 2 people. I'm not talking about dating. It might be your partner. It might be your sibling. It is anyone that you know that you're in a 2-person relationship with. The research there says you need 5 positives for each negative. because our brains are doing this thing called chunking. They're making sense of information, and I chunk like with like. So if I had distrust for a business partner in the past, because my business didn't work out well with them, every new business partner, unfortunately, because my brain thinks it's so smart, is chunking bad business partner data, because that was my previous experience. So that's really how that bias gets in the way. And it's our brain doing us a favor, but it's doing it without us knowing it's doing that. And so then when that data gets encoded, we're just creating more meaning on top of something before pausing and saying, hey, this might not be a pattern. And that sounds abstract. So let me explain. Our brain's constantly finding patterns. One of the patterns we like to find is faces. It's why, mountains we say look like faces. Even some cars we create headlights, so they look like humans.
Yeah.
Our brain believes in pattern. And so it's looking for patterns all the time. And it's looking for patterns of behavior. And that's where, early times that we've been disappointed will let us create a mold, like a cookie cutter, of more times that we're not working things out, and we put that dough in there so it fits that same cookie.
Yeah. And so what have you seen in your experience is the impact or the risk of kind of that coding, that neurological coding? Like why are we even talking about that here today on Legit Leadership Live? I'm curious what you've seen as that happens as a result of kind of not course correcting necessarily.
Yeah, I think the challenge with that is the longer we do something, you've all heard about neuroplasticity, right? So let me explain what that is. Neuroplasticity is simply what fires together, wires together. It's these neural pathways that we create via habit. And I like to think of them as snow. Having lived in the Northeast for a long time, I lived in Boston, and we get snow. So a large set of snow of 2 feet wide, I'm going to walk down something someone else has trodden in because I'm a short person. It's just easier to do. So the more we repeat that pattern, the deeper that neural pathway gets. These painful neural pathways, which are less pleasurable, which you could call negative emotions, are really deep inside of us. And they're the grooves we always want to walk down. So if I create neuroplastic change and I create my new pathway, again, I'm short, it's going to be a lot thinner than the other deeper pathway. And so we have to make a concerted effort to build up these new neural pathways. Now, these more painful pathways never deplete. They never go away. So that moment of real stress, like the business is downturning, or I am in a conflict, or my mother passes away, I will still probably jump into that other deep neural pathway, but we want to build these new ones. So that's really part of this, is these habits we have with one another in our businesses were set up really early in our life. Our emotional intelligence profile was set up in those very beginning years of our life when we couldn't make sense of the world. And we still bring those as adults to us. And people will fight over whether we have emotions first or awareness first, but they happen within a quarter second of each other. And the piece is, how do we increase the time that we're aware to increase choice?
And so it's kind of sounds like you're saying, as humans, we kind of take the path of least resistance because it's familiar to us. The tracks in the snow that are a little bit easier to kind of get through, or it's almost like a default mechanism. But then the idea is to create new pathways so that we don't get kind of stuck in that perpetual rut, essentially.
That's correct, Raabia.
Why don't we keep going? And then repost. Oh my gosh. My apologies.
It's okay.
Oh, that's so bad.
I'm here. I feel bad for the people who, weren't able to make it work. That's okay.
I know. All right. Well, okay, let me ask you this then, because I think it might be timely. As we're talking about times of stress or when things don't go as planned, or if we're worried, like I feel now, I'm feeling bad about this. What's happening in the brain what's going on neurologically during times of stress, which I know we experience quite a bit in the workplace and during situations like this?
Yeah, it depends on what's triggering it, but for the most part, I mentioned that our brain really likes to be really smart. It likes to be smart, and it's also lazy. And so our brain is the most self-deceiving organ that exists. Like, our heart doesn't deceive itself that it's beating fast when it's beating slow. Our brain, however, likes to be right, and it likes to be certain. So we do not handle uncertainty well. In fact, in moments of uncertainty, it's almost sending a short circuit to our brain, because our brain is trying to say from point A to point B equals C. That's why it's so exhausting, because we can't match a pattern. We can't easily say this equals that. And so it's taking us off autopilot and allowing us to actually work. That is really good for us in those moments where it doesn't feel easy peasy, where we're actually experiencing healthy stress, not an overabundance of constant chronic stress. Those are our moments for change, because we can't do autopilot. I don't know, like you said several times, I've never seen this. I don't know what to do. You were actually actively testing out new hypotheses. Those moments where we think we know everything are our dangerous moments. That's the sign that we're on autopilot, that we're not actually seeing things. We have these autonomous cars now that drive, and how many of them have hit people or dogs? Because AI actually struggles recognizing dogs, believe it or not. They'll call them, cows or other things.
Wow.
Our brain is very similar. We drive home some days and we don't remember how we got home. We know we got there. We didn't hit anyone. But those are our moments where we've done this so much. It's like the back of our hand that our brain literally shuts down. So you want those moments of critical thinking, those change moments, and you want them at a time that you can handle them. So it turns into resilience and resourcefulness versus shutdown.
Versus shutdown. Yeah. And I think you were saying, you and I were talking the other day that like 43 or 45% of the time we're on autopilot. There was a stat that you shared. Can you kind of share that with the rest of the group here?
Yeah, Columbia University said 45% of the time of our waking hours we're in habit. Texas A&M did a different study, and they came up with 43%. So I like to simplify it for people, whether it's 43% or 45%, anything over 40%, if you're thinking about grade school math, only lets you have 60% max, which is barely passing.
Wow.
So we're barely passing during our waking hours of non-habitual behavior. And by habit, habits take over 18 months to create. They don't take 21 days. That's a myth. There was a study of habits.
Oh gosh.
And habits take at least 99 days. Some very simple, small habits can do in 21 days. But if you were to have me go through a questionnaire of habits you actually want to change, almost none of those will fit in a 21-day period of time. So it takes at least 99 days to create a habit. Some simpler habits, 66 days, but for real neuroplastic change, to create that new neural pathway, that new packed down snow to walk through, takes 18 months. So when Texas A&M and Columbia say between 43 and 45% of the time we're in habit, they mean about almost everything.
Wow. Like, when you say everything, can you give us some examples? Like, I'm thinking walking and how we walk might be one, but what impacts our habits, or what are the habits that are on autopilot that impact the workplace and how we show up and how we kind of connect with others?
When we want to eat, even though we might not recognize that we're hungry, but we're getting hangry. That's one of them. Where we walk, how we walk, how many times we sit in that spot in the office that feels like comfort to us in our conference room. I know many of us haven't been in conference rooms in a while. Where we place our papers. I know exactly where to get my notebook. I can do it sometimes without looking at it, because it sits in its particular spot. It's part of the reason why when you might be having a weight control issue, people encourage you to eat with your left hand. Not because it's harder to use your left hand if you're right-handed, but because you're so used to reaching for snacks with your right hand that you might not even be aware that you're putting the popcorn in your mouth. And when you put it on your left side, your brain cognitively realizes you're moving your left hand, you're picking it up, you're feeling the texture, and you know it's coming into your mouth. So literally,
yeah.
all the things, how we listen, how we lean in, our body language. So you might actually, if you've ever been told you're unapproachable, maybe, or, and I've got this feedback, I have dark features, so people think I'm serious, but I also listen. When I listen, my face gets a little more serious because I'm spending so much energy listening to you. But you probably notice when I talk, that's when I smile. But I'm a quiet person. So it took a while for me to understand why people might have thought I wasn't that concerned, because I was listening so deeply. It was so concentrating for me to listen.
Right, right. Oh, that's fascinating. So even in this moment, which I appreciate how gracious you are, Natalie, and that there's this technical difficulty, but it's essentially like my assistant and I, we prepared for this. We have a standard operating procedure. We know like how everything goes, and it's not working as planned. And in those moments, that's kind of what triggers, is that kind of the trigger for the brain to jump off autopilot when something is not going as it normally does?
Yeah, new and different. It's also part of our brain's reward system is dopamine. You've all heard of dopamine. It's the same thing that goes off when we get a text. That's why we feel these phantom texts at times, because we want that dopamine reward. And new and different, although at first it feels a little hard, you get that dopamine rush. It's why people were so exhausted for being inside during COVID, because everything was the same. The way you dressed, where you sat, nothing changed. And so it's uncomfortable, but the payout is really great. And so finding those moments of challenge that allow you that dopamine reward, but don't lock you into feeling defeated, because small successes build to larger successes. So when we create an insurmountable habit, I don't like exercising. So if I decided to run a marathon, I'm setting myself up for failure. But if I do small pieces, like start walking or run 1 mile, walk 1 mile, which is why those apps, they're like from couch to 5K work, because
Right.
they're not asking you to turn everything over at one time.
Yeah. You kind
So
of
how
take
do
it.
you, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, so you kind of take it one step at a time. Even kind of, well, I'm wondering, does taking it one step at a time help with easing the discomfort along the way? Like, what's the connection between that?
It's both eases the discomfort and it prevents overload. So overload creates brain fuzz, because we have two main brain waves. We have our beta brain waves, which is like here to here. And that's the thing we're actually thinking about, that I know I'm thinking about. We're thinking about this program now. But there are theta brain waves, which are kind of in the back of our head. They're the reason why you have a eureka moment when you're in the shower, because you finally have the time to come back to that, which is part of why uncertainty doesn't work for us. We're constantly trying to solve.
Yeah.
And so if I give myself just enough difference to solve for something, I get to tackle that versus actually short circuiting all the things, because we're constantly solving other things in the back of our brain. It's why if you had asked me for a document and said, Natalie, I need you to send me an outline for this a week before, but I don't send it to you a week before. I send it to you 2 days before.
Right.
Every day after I've missed the deadline, I'm filling up your theta brainwaves of what you're thinking about, even if you haven't told me about it. And so you're going to get brain fog because I'm making you wait, because your brain had decided it was going to solve the problem on Monday, but I made you wait till Wednesday.
Oh my goodness. So that's like quite literally what brain fog is. It's like not going to plan, not according to plan necessarily.
It's
Oh, wow.
not solving by the date you decided to solve it. And our brain always picks a date, even if I don't tell you the date.
Yeah.
I've picked the date because I don't do uncertainty. We can't do uncertainty and let things just live in the ether forever.
Right. Right. So in light of this, us, we don't like uncertainty for the most part. And I can be the most spontaneous person. I like, exciting things and surprises and going and doing things. But not everyone likes uncertainty in places like work. But this whole, I mean, if there's one word we can use to describe the last 16 to 18 months, has been uncertainty in so many ways, and brain fog probably. So with all these things happening, what's with your explanation of the neurological kind of situations that go on in our brain, and then with others, what can we do? Like, how can we shift gears to, like I was saying earlier, course correct, so to speak, or like do something where we jump off autopilot and then work effectively on things? Like, what are some steps folks can take to do that?
The first thing is to let go.
Hmm.
So, or speak up. So we'll keep using the example of me not giving you something on Monday. You can let go that it's coming on Monday and draw a new deadline. That if we're doing this on, today's Tuesday, so we're doing it on Tuesday, that you need to have it for me a half an hour beforehand. That's your drop dead date. So you move that deadline, because too many of us, we ruminate. And there's a lot of research on rumination, our brain chatter. They say that it's about 4,000 words a minute.
Oh my
Just
goodness.
kind of nannering at us about what we expected. And again, that little voice is kind of mean too. So he's telling us how we didn't do things right.
Right.
So you can silence your chatter by picking a new date. You can call me and say, hey, Natalie, we had agreed that I would have this by Monday. When can you get it to me so I can help you come create that new deadline? That's that expectation piece. Why we don't share expectations is we think it has something to do with the other person. A healthy boundary doesn't have to do with me. Raabia, if you need a day to prepare, that's what you need. And I can either meet you or not meet you. And I get to balance my own time. You know, I'm very busy, but I get to choose what else moves to help meet your boundary. You don't have to solve that for me. So that's part of the unmet expectation piece. So one, you can move on and just adjust your timeline. Or two, you can give me feedback of a healthy boundary that I then control how I work on my half of that equation. If I have to stay up late because I haven't planned well, that's a me issue, not a you issue.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's so interesting as you're saying that, because one of the modules that I will work on with clients in the world of leadership development is giving feedback or constructive feedback. And I think I was reading an article recently that I usually talk about during this workshop, and it's that anytime most times when we are resistant to giving feedback, it's about us, like protecting the giver of the feedback, because we don't want to make ourselves uncomfortable necessarily. But then most folks at the end of the day who are the recipients, they're like, I wish you would have told me earlier, because, you know, no one's a mind reader. So there's an interesting push and pull between, you know, maybe it's, I don't know, does that have to do, you think, with some self-preservation? Like, because it feels funky to be able to talk, or to make an effort to talk with someone about expectations?
Yeah, so neurologically, our desire for safety outweighs our desire for belonging. We used to think, our desire for belonging outweighs our desire for safety. I said it the wrong way. And we used to think that, sorry, I don't remember how I said it this last time. We used to think that safety was the most important thing. Everyone has said that. Safety is the most important thing. It's actually belonging. And so if we know belonging is important, where did belonging start? This is why, because I work with many times family companies, they're not all family companies, but a family is a system, just like a business. The study of family systems theory is really helpful, because the first place we wanted to belong was our family. That's actually the basis of personality. I decide how I show up, and I know you have two siblings, Raabia. I also have two siblings. I have a sister and a brother, and my sister is very pretty, used to model. My sister got to be the pretty one. My brother is very funny. He got to be the funny one. So I got to be the studious one that wasn't, you know, a little more energetic, right? Because my parents had their hands full. I was also the last person. So a lot of our personality shows up when we're young, trying to fit into our family system. And then we get a little older, And we do change as adults, right? We change in college, we change in high school, but we're still desiring belonging. And I'm genuinely afraid of doing anything that might damage that belonging, even at my own safety, even at the risk of my own safety, which is why we talk so much in organizations about psychological safety.
Psychological safety. Yeah.
So that we can feel not necessarily safe, but the ability to disagree constructively, to ask questions, to give feedback. So more of my authentic self can show up in the workplace. Although, yes, I still am very studious. I'm not as quiet as I was at home. Most people who know me now wouldn't have thought I was the quiet kid.
Really?
Because I have things to say.
Yeah. That's, and this notion of psychological safety, I have to say that has come up. I feel like it's such an en vogue term now, but it's been around for forever in terms of its importance. And in the work that I'll do with clients on culture and realigning executive teams to be able to figure out what kind of culture they want, one of the biggest things that tends to come up is we want to create an environment of psychological safety, a workplace that really embraces and cultivates psychological safety. And I'm curious to know, because you've been in that world of understanding psychological safety, not just from a workplace standpoint, from organizational, and families. What do you think has shifted in, whether it's like the time we're in, I would say now, meaning before or pre or even during pandemic, or what the future looks like? What do you think has shifted in organizations and in people to really start demanding and really kind of holding one another accountable to having places of psychological safety? Whereas I don't think it was the case necessarily like a few decades ago.
Yeah, and I think leadership development has evolved over the year. I have an OD background, so that's part of it too, is, we used to really focus on our weaknesses. That was the most important thing, is I'm going to be a better person by muscling through. And the research now says if we use just 6% of our strengths in our workplace, we're 60% more effective.
Wow.
So if part of my strength is, and it might not be, and all of you watching can tell me, if it's being charismatic versus being quiet, and I'm not using that, I'm not getting 60% of my efficacy, right? And that was part of the conversation about masking we talked about. The research shows that people spend 20 to 25% of their time, on average, every person, masking in the work environment. I'm doing the thing I think you need me to do to be professional. So I actually worked at a really button-up organization that didn't let me wear pink shirts. I got a lot of feedback about like pink or purple shirts. They were like, it's white or like a neutral blue. And I was like, well, that's strange. I wear bright shirts because I have trouble seeing colors, but I can see bright colors. Now, everyone's masking 25 to 25% of the time, and they might be masking their strengths. Some people who feel persecuted in the workplace, like people in the LGBTQI spectrum until recently didn't have protections to work in the work environment. So when you actually feel actively persecuted, you spend 100% of your time masking. I'm Hispanic. My mom is Hispanic, and so I'm half Hispanic. And so the one stat I remember off the top of my head is 73% of Latinx women particularly spend time masking in the workplace, and Black women even more. So you have these employees pretending to not be who they are, and we're seeing lack of retention, lack of engagement. You're seeing poor work product. And so when the advent of organizational development realized an engaged employee doing their best, even if it looked different than your best, because I'm a different person, that made the organization better. And that's really where the psychological safety is happening. Because if we're not all the same, wearing the white and blue shirts, talking the same at the same pace and the same language, and our differences show up, we start bumping into each other.
For sure. Yeah.
And now we need an environment to have brave conversations, to have safety, so that the bumping doesn't become conflict. It actually becomes a constructive dialogue.
And how how can we, excuse me, balance masking, or I don't know if a synonym to that is code switching. In some ways, I know that's like a little bit of a hot button term, but essentially like not showing up as our authentic selves is an issue, but then also having some sort of structure and standards and in some semblances of uniformity around values, et cetera, that an organization requires to be what it is as an organization, like as to operate as a unit. So how can we, as organizations, as leaders, as just people, how can we balance the masking with showing up as our authentic selves?
And that's the challenge. I think partly it is you understanding your own triggers, your own genuine safety, which, an Enneagram or an emotional intelligence assessment can help you, because you need to deal with it first. I need to deal with the part of me that's unique and different and be okay with it before I can even decide to bring it in the workplace. And that's the first step, self-awareness. The second step is the relational awareness the organization needs to have with its employees. It needs to start behaving differently. And we should have values, visions, and missions that are active, living and breathing documents. And how they're living and breathing is they're co-created by a leadership team, by a focus group of employees they're a part of. You wouldn't believe, I mean, you would, you do this work, how many organizations that are serving women are run by men, organizations that are serving, a BIPOC population run by white people. That's not indicative of everything they need to know.
Yeah.
And so, you can hire some people to come and create the perfect vision, mission, and values for you and hand it to you. And it's really pretty. And it will sit in a desk. It will mean nothing to anyone. When I do values work, I ask them to define what it is, what that word means. And everyone says things like integrity. And it's like, well, what is integrity? Is that telling you to your face every time we're disagreeing that I have a difference of opinion? So we go through all what it actually is. But then we also say, what is it not? And one of the things that comes up is this phrase I love called cordial hypocrisy. And it means when I do this to you, but in my heart and in my head, I'm thinking this. Like I'm thinking no, although I'm saying yes. It's not cordial hypocrisy. It's not being polite now so I can be resentful later. And so when they actively, affirmatively say what it is, what it isn't, and test out the values before putting them on paper and have a date to revisit them, you get actionable versus idealistic values. So there's that two-part equation, what the employee brings in, what the workplace does, and then how we balance it as the two come together.
Yeah. And what was the term? What hypocrisy was it?
I call it cordial hypocrisy. It happens a lot in people who like to be polite, often in the South, where I just like you so much, I'm going to say yes to you all the time. But 90% of the time inside those unmet expectations, I'm thinking, why is Raabia always late? Even though I said it doesn't matter. I'm like, oh, it's fine, hon. Like, it's cool.
I like that. So it could be like the headline is no cordial hypocrisy.
No cordial hypocrisy, because it's only nice until it's not. It's nice until I have a pile high this big of resentments that I'm now angry about, that I'm now resenting you for, because I didn't address the conflict at the beginning, the process conflict of being late or being on time. And now it's become a personal conflict. Now I can't stand you. Every time you open your mouth, I'm just 5 seconds away from biting your head off, or I might visibly roll my eye in the workplace.
Right. And it's so interesting how this conversation all comes full circle, because I'm wondering if the resentment builds up also because it is a familiar track in the snow, and it's like the neurological pathway where it's like we're used to it. That's the habit essentially that we've formed by not addressing the key root cause of the issue, as opposed to like, the buildup of all the stuff that's piling up.
Which is why I think that emotional intelligence assessment or an Enneagram or both are really key. Because if I'm so afraid of not belonging, and we do want to belong, it is the most primal urge that humans have.
Yeah.
In fact, it's why we gossip, because we used to gossip to find out if you're safe. I'm going to ask someone else I know about Raabia to make sure she's safe. Is that belonging is so strong, so meaningful, that I need to feel safe in case I don't belong, to go move somewhere else, another organization perhaps. And so if I can start there, we can start mapping what belonging means in an actual organization.
Yeah, and talk about, like, I know it initially, that field, the field of diversity and inclusion, and then I went to diversity, equity, inclusion, and now people are adding in the B for belonging, because it sounds like that's ultimately the goal that we're all striving for in terms of human nature. It's just, that's innate within us.
It is. You know, I love hearing the B being added. The B is not very easy, just like psychological safety is not very easy. And I can send you a diagram to show later, but there's a version of development that's replaced Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And partly it's replaced Maslow's hierarchy of needs because he never actually created a hierarchy of needs. That was created by a consultant in the 70s. But it starts with the bottom of it's a boat. And so think about a sailboat, which needs a firm base so that it can stay on the water. The very bottom is safety. It's physical or psychological. And then it's connection first. Ideally, you can get to belonging. And then there's self-efficacy, or what you would call dignity, self-esteem. And when those three exist in a company or an organization or a family, you then get to open the sail, right? Because when the boat's rocking and the wind's blowing, you can't open the sail. And that sail has exploration, love or connection, meaning making, and significance, the purpose that they have. And those three things are what we need for employee engagement, for employee satisfaction. But many organizations aren't at the place of opening that sail yet.
Right. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I totally, you're speaking my language, because I know that's what all I work on as well. And it's that without that foundation there, it's really hard to build something on top of it. Because at the end of the day, that becomes the anchor for everything. It's like when it hits the fan, or when we're dealing with a storm, being able to have that to always lean into as the foundation is the key. That's the key to success, I think, in terms of a lot of organizational productivity.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Natalie, it has been amazing to have you. And I apologize for the technical difficulties. We have this recorded, so I will be sure to edit the clip without me trying to figure out what in the world is going on. And so my question to you before we jump off today is, what kind of, there's so much for us that we still could cover, of course, and I'd love to have you back again. What is one last kind of piece of advice or kind of fun fact, or anything that you think is a good thing to leave our listeners with as they head back into their day?
The main thing is our physiology. Our physiology knows before our brain does. And there are lots of biofeedbacks you can use, like a heart math inner balance. But the more you can get that biofeedback early, the more you catch that stress as eustress, which is the good stress that helps change things, versus the de-stress. So the more you are, which is why people talk about mindfulness, meditation, or yoga, or whatever, you can also have wearable devices, and many of you do have Apple Watches already. I know there's some Uber rings and things out there to catch those early moments of stress coming, because instead of saying, how do I limit my stress? Because you only want to limit de-stress. It's how do I optimize this as a moment for change, using that eustress to create the development that I need. Because if you're not getting any stress, you're not actually accessing that motivation either. So the more you're ready for that, and at organizational leaders, if you're listening or will listen to the replay, you can also give the gift of giving these assessments to your team to know that they're ready, not just the individual going and getting them on their own, and they're cheaper in bulk, to be honest.
Yeah. Awesome. I love that. That's such a practical tip. And I would say feel free, to reach out to myself and Natalie. Where can folks find you if they want to learn more about what your world looks like? How can we get in touch with you if there are any questions?
I think I'm here on LinkedIn, linked to you. There's also, my name is Natalie.McVeigh at EisnerAmper, EisnerAmper.com. And again, you could just Google my name and you'll probably find a bio inquiry where you can send me an email directly on EisnerAmper's site. I know it's tough to spell, but.
Wonderful. Thank you. And we'll put all your info also in the event page with the replay. So thank you again so much. I'm sending you a huge hug. It is always great to see you. I love hanging out and learning from you. And cheers to keeping calm, and thank you for your graciousness today. And we'll make it happen again sometime soon.
Awesome. Take care, Raabia. It was always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.